A badly wounded canine limps through the dense woods, dragging a torn black backpack with his teeth. Blood drips onto the leaves beneath him as his chest heaves from exhaustion, but he doesn't stop. Every step is a battle, yet something inside that backpack is more important than his life. Hours later, he finally collapses at the entrance of a police station, dropping the backpack at an officer's feet. When they open it, what's inside leaves everyone frozen. It changes the entire course of an investigation and saves hundreds of lives. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage and loyalty, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to K9 Era so you never miss heroic K9 stories like this. Now let's begin. It was a cold, misty evening on the outskirts of Denver when the quiet hum of radios filled the local police station. The air was tense after a massive drug raid had gone horribly wrong deep in the wooded trails beyond the city. Officers had gone in expecting a small exchange, but instead they walked into a well-planned ambush. Shots had been fired. Suspects had escaped. Among the chaos, one of the most trusted K9 units, Rex, a 5-year-old German Shepherd, trained for high-risk missions, had gone missing. He had been paired with Officer Rachel Mills for nearly 3 years. Together, they'd made dozens of arrests and were known as one of the most effective duos on the force. That night, however, as gunfire cracked through the trees and smoke blinded their vision, Rex had been separated from Rachel. Despite their frantic calls and whistles, he never came back. By the time night fell, officers assumed the worst. The woods were pitch black, making search efforts dangerous and almost impossible. Rachel sat at the back of a police SUV, clutching Rex's leash in trembling hands, her heart pounding with fear. She whispered his name under her breath, as though somehow he'd hear her from miles away. But Rex was out there somewhere, alone, and no one knew if he was even alive. Hours later, under the pale light of a half-moon, a lone figure emerged from the edge of the forest, staggering toward the road. It was Rex. His once shiny fur was smeared with blood and dirt. His left leg dragged awkwardly behind him, and deep claw marks raked across his side. His amber eyes, usually sharp and alert, were now dulled by pain and exhaustion, but clamped. Tightly between his jaws was something unusual, a small black, blood-stained backpack. Step by agonizing step, Rex dragged himself forward, leaving a faint trail of blood behind him. He limped across a mile of uneven terrain, crossing streams and climbing embankments, following some invisible instinct that guided him home. Each breath was ragged, each muscle screamed for rest, but he didn't stop. Whatever he carried was important, too important to abandon. Inside the police station, Officer Jake Turner was finishing his shift when he heard a faint scratching sound at the door. At first he dismissed it, assuming it was just the wind, but then the sound grew louder, followed by a low, weak whimper. Curious, Jake stood up and walked toward the entrance, pulling the door open. What he saw made his blood run cold. There, barely standing, was Rex, battered, bleeding, trembling, yet refusing to let go of the backpack clenched in his teeth. "Rex! Oh my God!" Jake shouted, rushing forward as other officers gathered around. Rachel, who had been in the back, making calls, dropped everything and sprinted to the door. "Rex!" she cried, tears already streaming down her face. But when she tried to grab the backpack, Rex growled softly, his weak body trembling but his grip unrelenting. His eyes locked with hers, pleading but determined, as though saying, "Not yet. This isn't just mine. This matters." Realizing the urgency, Jake knelt and spoke softly. "Okay, buddy. It's okay. You made it. You're safe now." Slowly, carefully, he eased the backpack from Rex's jaws. As soon as it left his teeth, Rex collapsed onto the cold tile floor, too exhausted to move. Rachel knelt beside him, cradling his head, while officers scrambled to call the vet on standby. Jake placed the backpack on the table and stared at it. The zipper was half broken, the fabric soaked with mud, and one strap was shredded. It didn't look like much, but instinct told him there was something inside worth Rex's fight. As more officers crowded around, Jake slowly unzipped it, the room falling silent in anticipation. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Inside lay a burner phone, a crumpled map covered in handwritten coordinates, and a small, locked metal case. The phone's screen was cracked, but still powered on. The map was stained with smudges of what looked like dried blood, yet the markings were clear. Someone had circled multiple locations deep within the forest, including the very spot where the ambush had happened. But it was the small locked case that drew everyone's attention. The latch was dented, scratched as though someone had tried to force it open. Whatever was inside, Rex had protected it with his life. Detective Sarah Monroe, who had led the failed raid, was called in immediately. She arrived within minutes, taking one look at the contents before locking eyes with Jake. "This isn't just evidence," she said quietly. This could be everything." Rex stirred faintly, letting out a soft whimper, and Rachel stroked his fur, whispering soothing words. As paramedics arrived to take him to the emergency vet, Jake carefully zipped the backpack shut and handed it to Sarah. No one knew yet what secrets the case held or why Rex had risked his life to bring it back. But one thing was clear. Whatever was inside that backpack had the power to change everything. The small metal case sat heavily on the table, its scratched surface reflecting the dim lights of the police station. The room buzzed with tension as officers whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between the case and Rex, who lay unconscious on a blanket in the corner, his chest rising and falling shallowly. The vet had stabilized him, but his condition was critical. Every now and then Rachel knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his paw, whispering encouragements, willing him to fight through the pain. But despite her worry, she couldn't take her eyes off the backpack. Whatever Rex had risked his life to retrieve, whatever was inside that case, had to be worth his suffering. Detective Sarah Monroe stood silently, her gloved hands folded as she studied the contents of the bag laid out before her, the burner phone, the crumpled map, and the locked case. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't just evidence. It was a key, a thread that could unravel the entire failed raid, and maybe much more. She turned to Officer Jake. "Get me bolt cutters," she said sharply. Within seconds, a young rookie dashed off and returned with a set of heavy-duty cutters. Sarah knelt down, gripping the case firmly. The lock was old and dented, but stubborn. It took 3 sharp snaps before the latch finally gave way, the metallic crack echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. When Sarah slowly lifted the lid, everyone leaned in, holding their breath. Inside were several small, sleek USB drives, neatly stacked and labeled with strange codes, strings of numbers and letters that made no immediate sense. Beneath them lay a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover worn and stained, pages filled with cryptic sequences, addresses, and what looked like transaction records. Sarah's brow furrowed as she flipped through the first few pages. "This," she muttered, "this is big, very big." She handed one of the USB drives to the department's IT specialist, Officer Brian Collins, who rushed to plug it into his secured laptop. The screen flickered to life as he entered several bypass codes, and soon files began opening one after another. His eyes widened as he scrolled through encrypted documents, high-resolution images, and confidential recordings. "Oh my God," Brian whispered, his voice trembling. "These are surveillance records, ledgers, payoffs, routes." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her sharp gaze scanning the data. It was worse than they imagined. These drives contained evidence of a massive drug cartel operating across multiple states, with names, lots of names, distributors, suppliers, buyers, and even worse, there were familiar names, names Sarah recognized from local politics and law enforcement. "This explains everything," she said grimly. "The ambush, they knew we were coming. Someone fed them our plans." The realization hung heavy in the air. Someone inside the system had betrayed them, and Rex had somehow stumbled onto the evidence that proved it. That backpack wasn't just a lead. It was dynamite. It had the power to destroy careers, dismantle criminal empires, and expose deep-rooted corruption. But it also made everyone in the room a target. Sarah turned to Rachel, who was still kneeling by Rex. "Do you understand what your partner just did?" she said softly. He didn't just save us. He brought us the key to taking down an entire network. But if they realize we have this... She glanced at the window where the shadows of the dark street loomed just beyond the glass. They'll come for it, and they'll come for him. Almost on cue, the burner phone on the table vibrated, startling everyone. Sarah grabbed it and hesitated for a moment before answering on speaker. A deep, cold voice filled the room. "We know what you have," it said. "Return the case and the dog, and maybe you'll live to see another day." Then, silence. The room went still. Rachel felt a chill crawl down her spine, her hand instinctively tightening around Rex's paw. "They know," Jake whispered. "How the hell do they already know?" Sarah slammed the phone down. "Because someone in this department is working with them," she said flatly. "This entire station is compromised. No one outside this room can know about the drives, not yet." She turned to Brian. "Copy everything, encrypt it, and upload it to a secure offline server, now." As Brian scrambled to comply, Sarah ordered Jake to seal the evidence in a secondary vault. But even as they prepared, unease settled like a weight in the air. Outside, the night was unnaturally still. The streets were empty, but every creak of the old building, every distant car engine, sounded like a looming threat. Rachel stayed by, Rex's side, stroking his ears softly, whispering the same words she always used when they were on dangerous missions together. "I've got you. You're safe." But she knew, deep down, neither of them were safe now. A few hours later, when most of the station had quieted, Sarah sat alone in her office, the notebook open in front of her. She traced her finger along the scribbled coordinates and underlined names, her mind piecing together connections faster than she could write them down. Every revelation was worse than the last. The cartel wasn't just moving drugs. They were laundering money, trafficking weapons, and bribing officials at every level. This case wasn't going to bring down a gang. It was going to expose an empire. Suddenly, the lights in her office flickered, and she heard footsteps in the hallway. They were heavy, deliberate, too slow to be casual. Her hand instinctively went to the holster at her hip. Then a shadow crossed her frosted glass door, pausing for just a second before moving on. Sarah waited, her finger hovering over the trigger, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. But after a tense minute, the hallway fell silent again. She knew. One thing for certain, they were being watched. Meanwhile, back in the quiet corner of the station, Rex stirred weakly on his blanket. His ears twitched as though he sensed the same danger Sarah felt, and his tail gave the faintest thump against the floor. Rachel smiled faintly through her exhaustion, squeezing his paw gently. "Rest now, hero," she whispered. "Tomorrow we fight back." The next morning brought no sunlight, only a heavy, oppressive gloom that settled over the Denver Police Department like a storm cloud. Rain hammered against the windows, its steady rhythm merging with the distant rumble of thunder. Inside, the air was just as tense. Detective Sarah Monroe barely slept, spending most of the night combing through the encrypted files Rex had delivered. Every detail unearthed painted a darker picture. This wasn't just a cartel. It was a sprawling empire backed by high-ranking officials, corrupt cops, and even local politicians. Rex had unknowingly carried back evidence capable of destroying dozens of powerful lives. By 6 a.m., the secure conference room was full. Only the officers Sarah fully trusted were present: Rachel, Jake, Brian, and 3 others. The blinds were drawn, doors locked, and all electronics except Brian's isolated system were banned. Sarah stood at the head of the table, holding the small leather notebook in one hand, her expression carved in stone. "The USB drives confirm what we feared," she began, her voice steady but grim. "This isn't just about narcotics. The people were dealing with control weapons, laundering networks, and human trafficking routes across 4 states. They've bought politicians, police captains, even judges." The weight of her words pressed down on the room like a vice. Rachel, sitting beside the table with Rex's head gently resting in her lap, stroked his fur absent-mindedly, though her gaze was fixed on Sarah. "So what's the play?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. Sarah inhaled slowly before answering. "We're sitting on a bomb. These drives are enough to bring them down. But once they realize how much we know, they'll come for us. Last night's call wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Brian, hunched over his laptop, interrupted. Sarah, he said, his voice strained. You're going to want to see this. He turned the screen around to reveal live security, feeds from the station perimeter. 3 black SUVs were idling across the street, their tinted windows reflecting the rain. No license plates, no movement, just waiting. Damn it, Sarah muttered, her jaw tightening. They're here. Rachel's stomach dropped, and instinctively, her hand rested protectively on Rex's neck. He stirred slightly, his ears twitching, as though sensing the danger lurking just beyond the walls. His body was still battered and weak, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. Listen up, Sarah said, her voice rising above the low rumble of thunder outside. They want Rex. They want the drives. And if we give them either, everything he fought for is gone. But they're not stupid. They'll try to smoke us out first. Jake stood, checking his sidearm. So what's the move? Reinforcements? Sarah shook her head. We can't trust anyone outside this room. For all we know, half the department is compromised. She paused, glancing at the door. We lock this place down, full lockdown. No one gets in or out. Before she could finish, a deafening crash echoed through the station as the front windows shattered under a hail of automatic gunfire. Officers dove for cover, shouting orders as glass rained across the floor. The cartel had made their move. Rachel shielded Rex instinctively, curling her body around his as bullets ripped through desks and shattered computer screens. Jake returned fire from behind an overturned table while Sarah shouted for everyone to secure the drives. The air filled with smoke, gunpowder, and chaos. Through the haze, Rachel saw movement near the side entrance. 2 masked men in tactical gear were breaching, rifles raised, eyes scanning for targets. She grabbed Rex's leash, whispering urgently, "Come on, boy, I need you." Despite his injuries, Rex pushed himself onto trembling legs. He growled low, baring his teeth, the deep rumble vibrating through his chest. Rachel led him behind a pillar, whispering commands she'd drilled into him since day one. Wait, watch, strike. One of the masked men rounded the corner, and in a blur of motion, Rex lunged. His jaws clamped down on the man's forearm, tearing through fabric and muscle with unrelenting force. The man screamed, dropping his rifle as Rachel tackled the second intruder with sheer adrenaline. Shots rang out from Jake's sidearm, taking down one attacker instantly while the other struggled under Rex's weight until finally going limp. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Rex's labored breathing and the steady drip of rainwater through the shattered windows. The remaining SUVs outside roared to life, speeding off into the foggy morning. When the gunfire stopped, officers stumbled from cover, surveying the wreckage. 4 cartel operatives lay incapacitated, 2 others had escaped, and everyone in the room knew they'd be back, with reinforcements. Sarah crouched beside Rex, stroking his blood-matted fur. "You shouldn't even be standing," she whispered, admiration and fear mingling in her voice. But Rex, panting heavily, pressed his head into her palm and gave a faint wag of his tail. The captured attackers were dragged to holding cells, but Sarah doubted they'd talk. These men weren't amateurs. They were soldiers. And if 3 SUVs had shown up without hesitation, it meant one thing. The cartel knew exactly what Rex had brought back. Later that evening, when the chaos settled and the station's barricades were reinforced, Sarah sat alone in the evidence room with the drives and notebooks spread out before her. She stared at the pages, committing every name and location to memory. They couldn't stay here. It was too dangerous. The cartel had connections everywhere. She made the call to transfer Rex, Rachel, and the evidence to a safe house outside the city. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only way to keep them alive long enough to process the data. Rachel didn't argue. She knew Rex needed rest, and every second they stayed in Denver put him at greater risk. But as the convoy prepared to leave under the cover of darkness, Rex lifted his head from Rachel's lap, ears twitching again. His low growl rumbled through the quiet van. Rachel frowned, glancing through the rain-streaked window into the night beyond. The streets were empty, silent, too silent. Then, in the distance, the faint hum of engines approached, more than one, closing in fast. The rain poured harder as the convoy moved through the winding back roads, headlights cutting faint beams into the misty darkness. Inside the lead SUV, Rachel sat in the back seat with Rex's head resting gently across her lap. His breathing was shallow, his body bandaged and bruised, but his eyes, those sharp amber eyes, were open now, scanning the night like a seasoned soldier. Every distant noise made his ears twitch, and Rachel knew his instincts were working overtime, even in his fragile state. Detective Sarah Monroe rode shotgun, one hand resting on her sidearm, the other gripping the door handle. Beside her, Officer Jake Turner drove silently, his jaw clenched tight, knuckles white against the steering wheel. The USB drives and the leather notebook sat inside a secured black case on Sarah's lap, their weight heavier than gold and deadlier than any weapon they carried. Behind them, 2 additional SUVs flanked the convoy, each packed with trusted officers, armed and alert. Their goal was simple: reach the safe house 40 miles outside Denver, an isolated cabin surrounded by dense pine forests and far away from prying eyes. If they made it there, they could analyze the data securely, plan their next move, and keep Rex safe. But deep down, Rachel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling clawing at her chest. Something about the silence felt wrong. Rex stirred suddenly, his ears pricking and his low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Rachel stiffened. "Sarah," she whispered urgently. "Rex senses something." Sarah turned to her immediately, her eyes narrowing. "Jake, slow down. Lights off." The convoy dimmed their headlights and crawled forward under the cover of darkness, their engines barely above a whisper. Everyone strained their senses, listening. That's when they heard it. The faint hum of engines behind them. Jake cursed under his breath and checked the rearview mirror. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted them. 4 black SUVs closing in fast, their headlights cutting through the mist like knives. "We've got company!" he shouted, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The calm silence shattered instantly. Radios buzzed with urgent commands as the officers in the trailing SUVs tightened formation. Sarah grabbed her radio. "Do not engage unless fired upon. Priority is getting Rex and the drives to the safe house." But the cartel wasn't here to follow rules. Within seconds, the pursuing SUVs gunned forward, their high-powered engines roaring like beasts in the dark. Muzzle flashes erupted from their windows, the sharp rattle of automatic gunfire tearing through the storm. Bullets pinged off the armored doors as glass shattered in the rear SUV, forcing it to swerve violently. "Hang on," Jake shouted, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The convoy veered off the main road, plunging down a narrow dirt path through the woods. The tires skidded in the mud, spraying dirt and rainwater in every direction. Branches whipped against. The windows and the road beneath them became a blur of wet gravel and shadowy trees. Rachel shielded Rex with her body, whispering soft reassurances even as her heart raced. "Stay with me, boy. I've got you. Just stay with me." But Rex wasn't cowering. His gaze stayed fixed on the rear window, his body tense despite his wounds, ready to fight if needed. The cartel SUVs didn't hesitate. They followed closely, their engines snarling as they cut through the trees like predators on the hunt. One of them rammed into the rear SUV, sending it spinning off the dirt road and slamming into a tree with a crunch of metal and shattering glass. "Vehicle down!" someone yelled through the radio, their voice breaking through static. Sarah gritted her teeth, gripping the secured case tighter. "We can't stop. They'll swarm us if we do." Suddenly, the dirt road opened into a small clearing where the path split into 2 narrow trails. Jake made a split-second decision, yanking the wheel left. "Hold on!" he shouted as the SUV fishtailed through the mud, narrowly missing a fallen log. Behind them, one of the cartel vehicles miscalculated the turn, plowing into a ditch with a violent crash. But 3 SUVs remained, relentless and closing the gap. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Rachel spotted muzzle flashes again as bullets ripped through the forest, splintering bark and shattering branches. One round struck the hood of their SUV, sending sparks flying. "Return fire!" Sarah barked into the radio. and the officers in the second escort vehicle unleashed controlled bursts from their rifles. The sharp cracks of gunfire echoed through, the clearing mingling with the roar of engines in the pounding storm. Then came the moment none of them expected. A Cartel SUV pulled up alongside their vehicle, its tinted window lowering to reveal a masked gunman aiming a high-caliber rifle directly at the rear tires. Before Sarah could react, the gun fired, the deafening crack ripping through the air. Their back left tire exploded, the SUV lurching violently to one side. "Hold on!" Jake roared, fighting the wheel as the vehicle skidded wildly on the soaked dirt road. Rachel clung to Rex, bracing for impact as trees blurred past their windows. Somehow Jake managed to regain control, steering them back onto the path. But now their speed was cut in half and the Cartel was gaining fast. That's when Rex moved. Ignoring his injuries, he scrambled up and pressed his paws against the window, barking fiercely, his snarls cutting through the chaos like war drums. Rachel tried to hold him back, but his body surged with an energy she hadn't seen since before the raid. "Rex, no, you're hurt!" she pleaded, but he wouldn't listen. Suddenly, the second escort SUV swerved sharply, blocking the path of one of the pursuing vehicles. There was a deafening crunch of metal as the two collided, both spinning off into the trees. Sparks lit the rain-soaked ground as twisted steel screeched against stone. 2 Cartel SUVs remained. As they neared a narrow bridge over a rushing creek, Sarah leaned forward, shouting over the roar of the storm. "Jake, floor it! That bridge is single lane. If we cross first, we can block them in." Jake didn't hesitate. He slammed the accelerator, the SUV roaring forward. The bridge groaned under the weight as they shot across, rain hammering against the wooden planks. One of the Cartel SUVs tried to follow, but before it could reach the midpoint, Sarah gave the order. The remaining escort vehicle braked hard and fired directly at the bridge supports. With a loud splintering crack, the soaked wood gave way, collapsing into the torrent below. The last 2 Cartel SUVs plunged into the creek, swallowed by churning water and shattered debris. For a moment, there was silence. The convoy slowed to a crawl on the other side of the bridge, breaths ragged, hearts pounding. Sarah clutched the secured case to her chest, staring back at the chaos they'd barely escaped. Rachel looked down at Rex, who rested his head on her lap again, his sides rising and falling in heavy gasps. "You did good, boy," she whispered softly, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You did so good." But Sarah knew this wasn't over. If the Cartel had sent this many men already, it meant one terrifying thing. They still didn't have everything they wanted. And until they did, none of them were safe. The convoy finally reached the safe house just before dawn, battered and exhausted, the storm still raging in the distance like an omen. The small cabin stood hidden among towering pine trees, its wooden frame dark and unassuming, perfectly chosen to avoid attention. But even as the vehicles parked under the dripping canopy, Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing unease inside her. Every instinct told her this wasn't over. This was just the quiet before the next storm. Rachel carefully lifted Rex from the back seat, cradling his weight against her chest as she hurried inside. He was still conscious, but barely. His breathing was labored, his fur matted with blood beneath fresh bandages. They laid him gently on a soft blanket near the fireplace, while a field medic unpacked supplies from a duffel bag. The vet, Sarah, had contacted earlier, arrived minutes later, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "He's lost a lot of blood," the vet said, checking Rex's wounds quickly. "He's exhausted and dehydrated, but he's alive. That dog, he's running on pure willpower." Rachel knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently, whispering softly like she always did on dangerous missions. "Hang in there, partner. You're not done yet. I need you, okay?" Rex's amber eyes flickered open at her voice, his tail giving the faintest twitch. Even on the edge of exhaustion, he seemed to understand her words. Sarah paced near the window, keeping her voice low as she spoke into a secure satellite phone. "We made it to the safe house, but we were ambushed. 2 vehicles down, 3 officers injured. The Cartel knows we have the evidence." She paused, glancing at the case resting on the table. "And I think someone's feeding them information from the inside." Hours later, while Rex rested and the others recovered, Sarah, Rachel, Jake, and Brian gathered around the heavy oak table. Brian had managed to bypass another layer of encryption on the USB drives and pulled up a fresh wave of files, his pale face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. This is bad," he murmured, scrolling rapidly. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice edged with frustration and fatigue. Brian turned the screen so everyone could see. Rows upon rows of transaction logs scrolled across it, payoffs, smuggling routes, coded communications. But what froze the room was the list of names, high-ranking officials, elected leaders, judges, and then one name near the top. Captain Adrian Locke. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. That can't be right." But Sarah's silence said otherwise. Locke wasn't just a captain, he was their captain, the head of the Denver Police Narcotics Division, the man who had overseen the entire failed raid. He had been the one to give them the operations details, the one who had promised it would be a clean sweep. And now, staring at the files Rex had nearly died to bring back, there was no doubt. He had betrayed them. Rachel's hand tightened into a fist as the realization hit her. "He sent us into that ambush," she said bitterly, her voice cracking. "He knew exactly what was waiting for us out there." Sarah closed her eyes, forcing herself to stay calm, though anger churned beneath her composed exterior. "It makes sense now. The cartel always knew our moves. Every failed raid, every leak, every ambush. It was Locke. He's been feeding them intel for years." Jake slammed his hand against the table, the sound sharp in the silence. "So what now? March back to the department and arrest him? The force probably reports to him. If he finds out what we know, we won't even make it back to Denver alive." Sarah turned her gaze to Rex, who was resting peacefully beside Rachel, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "Rex saved us once," she said softly. "We can't waste what he fought for. We need to move carefully, build an airtight case. When we hit them, it has to be one blow, clean and final." Brian nodded slowly. "The rest of the drives contain encrypted communications. If I can decode them, we'll have recorded calls, emails, and video feeds tying Locke directly to the cartel." "Do it," Sarah ordered, "and keep it offline. Not a single bite leaves this room." For the rest of the day, the team stayed holed up in the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling through the mountains as Brian worked tirelessly, sweat beading on his forehead as he cracked line after line of encryption. Rachel never left Rex's side, feeding him water through a syringe, adjusting his bandages, whispering promises that they'd make it through this together. That night, as the fire burned low and exhaustion threatened to pull everyone under, Rex stirred suddenly, his ears pricking up, his nose twitching toward the door. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Rachel's hand froze over his fur. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Sarah immediately motioned for silence. Everyone held their breath, listening. At first, there was nothing but the distant howl of wind through the pines. Then faintly came the sound of crunching gravel just outside the cabin. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the perimeter. Jake reached for his rifle silently, his finger brushing the safety. Brian quickly powered down the laptop, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the dim embers of the fire. Sarah crept to the window, parting the curtain ever so slightly. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the tree line, shadows upon shadows, the shifting shapes almost impossible to distinguish. And then she saw it, a faint red dot sliding across the wall inside the cabin. A laser sight. Down. Sarah hissed, diving to the floor as a suppressed shot shattered the glass. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, splintering wood and spraying debris. The team scrambled for cover as Rex barked fiercely despite his weakened state, his snarls echoing through the chaos. Rachel clutched Rex tightly, shielding him with her body as Sarah returned fire through the broken window. Jake kicked the table over, flipping it into a barricade as more bullets ripped through the logs. The cartel had found them. Again. Brian's voice trembled as he shouted over the gunfire. "How the hell did they find us this fast?" Sarah gritted, her teeth as she reloaded, her mind racing. "They didn't track us," she said bitterly. "Someone told them where we were. Locke knows." Even as the words left her mouth, the realization settled like lead in her chest. Their captain wasn't just dirty. He was pulling the strings, orchestrating every move. Rachel pressed her forehead against Rex's, whispering, "Stay with me, buddy. We're not done fighting yet." Rex's breathing was ragged, but his gaze stayed locked on the door, muscles tensing despite his pain. The cartel was here to finish what they'd started, and this time they weren't leaving until Rex, the drives, and everyone inside that cabin was dead. Bullets ripped through the cabin walls like angry hornets, wood splintering with every shot. Smoke and gunpowder thickened the air as Sarah barked. "Orders," her voice sharp but steady despite the chaos. "Jake, cover the west side. Rachel, stay down with Rex. Brian, get those drives secure." Outside, shadows darted between the trees, cartel assassins circling like predators closing in on trapped prey. Every second felt stretched, every heartbeat deafening against the roar of gunfire. Rex lay on the floor beside Rachel, his sides heaving, his amber eyes locked on the door with a predator's focus. Despite the bandages and the blood still dampening his fur, he wasn't broken. Not yet. When the shooting paused, Sarah took the chance to peek through the shattered window. There were at least a dozen of them out there, heavily armed, spreading into two flanks. They weren't here to negotiate. "We can't stay pinned," Jake growled, sliding a fresh magazine into his rifle. "If they rush us from both sides, this cabin's a coffin." Brian's hands shook as he clutched the metal case containing the drives. "We can't lose this evidence, Sarah. If Locke gets rid of it, everything Rex fought for is gone." Sarah's mind raced. The only advantage they had was knowing the terrain. A narrow ridge behind the cabin led down to a dry creek bed, a natural choke point. If they could lure the cartel there, they'd stand a chance. But someone had to make the first move, and fast. Then, out of nowhere, Rex stirred. He pushed against Rachel's arms, struggling to his feet despite the pain, racking his body. Rachel tried to hold him back. "No, buddy, you're hurt. You need to rest." But Rex didn't listen. His gaze flicked to the door, then back to Rachel, as if telling her exactly what he planned to do. Sarah knelt beside him, resting a hand on his collar, meeting his fierce, unyielding eyes. "You sure about this, partner?" Rex gave a faint wag of his tail, his answer clear. The plan formed instantly. Sarah would draw their attention with Jake and Brian providing cover, while Rex flanked around the side under Rachel's watch, carrying a small pouch of C4 charges they'd salvaged from the wrecked convoy. If they could set them on the ridge path, they could bottleneck the attackers and turn the tables. They moved fast. Sarah kicked open the back door, returning fire as Jake hurled a smoke grenade into the tree line. Thick gray clouds billowed, cloaking their retreat. "Move, move, move!" Sarah shouted as they dashed toward the ridge, Rex limping but refusing to slow. Behind them, the cartel opened up with everything they had, bullets shredding through branches as the team disappeared into the forest. By the time they reached the narrow choke point, Rex was panting hard, but his focus never wavered. Rachel crouched beside him, strapping the small C4 pouch to his harness. "Be careful," she whispered, kissing his head softly before letting him go. "Come back to me, okay?" Rex darted forward, hugging the shadows like he'd been trained 100 times before. The assassins were close now, their voices shouting commands in Spanish, flashlights cutting through the smoke as they advanced down the ridge. Sarah waited until Rex disappeared into the undergrowth before signaling Jake. "Ready. Wait for my mark." Rex slipped behind a fallen log, positioning himself perfectly under the overhang of the ridge. With quiet precision, he crawled up just enough to wedge the C4 pouch beneath a cluster of rocks. The trigger wire extended to where Rachel crouched, her trembling fingers poised over the detonator. Then one of the cartel soldiers spotted him. "El perro! Disparen al perro!" Gunfire erupted, dirt exploding around Rex as he bolted back down the slope, weaving and dodging despite his injuries. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, tears blurring her vision. "Come on, Rex, come on!" The assassins surged forward in pursuit, unaware they were walking straight into the trap. When the lead man's boot crunched over the rocks where Rex had been, Sarah shouted the command. "Now!" Rachel slammed her thumb onto the detonator. The explosion ripped through the ridge with a deafening roar, fire and rock raining down like thunder from the heavens. The shockwave knocked several attackers off their feet, and the entire slope collapsed into a choking cloud of dust and debris. Shouts turned to screams, then silence. The remaining cartel soldiers stumbled back, disoriented and terrified, retreating into the trees. But the victory came at a price. Rachel turned frantically, searching for Rex, her voice breaking. "Rex? Where's Rex?" Through the haze of smoke, she finally saw him lying on the ground, just beyond the blast radius, his body still and motionless. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling as she checked his pulse. "No, no, no. Stay with me, buddy. Don't you dare leave me now." Rex's eyes fluttered open weakly, his gaze locking onto hers one last time. His tail gave the faintest wag, and he exhaled a long, shaky breath as if to say, "We did it." Sarah and Jake knelt nearby, their faces etched with grief, but there was no time to mourn. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Backup finally arriving. Too late to save Rex, but soon enough to take control of the scene. Hours later, Locke was arrested in a sting operation orchestrated by Sarah and federal agents using the evidence Rex had delivered. The drives exposed his entire network, dismantling one of the largest cartel pipelines in the country. Headlines blazed across every news outlet. Hero K9 takes down cartel, sacrifices life to deliver justice.